The clock read 6:47 in the morning when I opened my eyes and realized something had changed forever. It wasn't the sound of my alarm that woke me, or the traffic outside. It was the sound of the shower stopping in the bathroom next to my room. Blake was up way too early for a guy who works late developing apps. My name's Dylan Carter. I'm 28, and I work as a welding technician at a refinery here in Austin, Texas. 6 months ago, when I took this promotion and had to move from my hometown, I decided to get a roommate to save some money and meet new people. What I didn't expect was for my roommate to become my best friend. Blake Morrison is 30 and he's a freelance developer. He mostly works with local startups, always glued to his laptop, creating things I can't even really understand. From day one, we got along great. He respected my space, I respected his. We split the bills, the chores, and watched games together on the weekends. It was simple, no fuss. At least that's what I thought until this morning. If you want to find out how a simple Tuesday can turn your life upside down, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I got out of bed with that typical laziness of someone who works rotating shifts. My routine has always been mechanical. Wake up at 5:30, go straight to the kitchen, brew the strong coffee that keeps me going, and eat peanut butter toast while checking the news on my phone. On weekends, I'd break that routine by sleeping in, making pancakes, and spending the day on the couch watching football. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered, and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right now. Our apartment is in a modern residential complex, one of those with a ground floor pool and a gym I never use. It has 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen connected to the living room, and big windows that let in amazing natural light in the morning. The balcony is small, but it has a cool view of the pool where the neighbors are always making some noise. The sound of distant traffic always accompanies my morning, along with the chatter of neighbors who wake up early to work out. The AC is always on because the Texas heat never lets up. But what really defines my mornings is the strong smell of my coffee filling the whole apartment. Blake normally woke up a lot later. He worked late and would sleep until around 10 a.m. That's why it was weird when I heard the shower running so early. I walked out of my room barefoot, just wearing shorts and an old t-shirt, and went to the kitchen to make my usual coffee. That's when it happened. The bathroom door opened, and Blake walked out with just a navy blue towel wrapped around his waist. Water droplets were still running down his shoulders, over his defined chest, until they disappeared into the towel. His brown hair was wet, stuck to his forehead, and he ran his right hand through it to push it back. For a few seconds, I just froze. I couldn't look away. We'd been sharing the same space for months, but never in a situation like this. Something stirred in me in a way I couldn't explain. A strange feeling in my stomach, a warmth that rose through my chest. "Hey, sorry man. I didn't know you were already up," Blake said, but his voice didn't have any real rush to get dressed. He just stood there, staring at me with a smile I'd never seen before. A smile that was provocative. "No problem. I always wake up early anyway," I managed to say, trying to sound natural. But my voice came out raspier than usual. Blake kept looking at me for a few more seconds, that smile still on his lips. Then he walked slowly to his room, and I realized my eyes had followed his every move. I stood there in the kitchen, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to me. I made my coffee on autopilot, but my hands were shaking slightly. Blake had always been a laid-back guy, comfortable with physical closeness. He wouldn't hesitate to pat my back, give me a shoulder rub after a tough day at work, or sit right next to me on the couch during movies. I've always been more reserved. I keep a respectful distance from people. I like my space to be clearly defined. Work is work, friendship is friendship, and everything stays in its place. But that morning, something changed. A line I didn't even know existed had been crossed. Over the next few days, small changes started happening. Blake began showing up in the kitchen during my morning coffee, starting conversations that went on much longer than usual. He would talk about the projects he was working on, ask about my day at the refinery, and comment on movies he wanted to watch. "Did you see they released the sequel to that 90s action movie?" he asked on a Thursday, pouring himself coffee into my extra mug. "We could watch it tonight, what do you think?" "Sure, why not?" I replied, trying to sound uninterested. But the truth was, I was eager to spend more time with him. That night, when we settled on the couch for the movie, Blake sat closer to me than he normally did. Our knees were almost touching. During a particularly intense chase scene, he put his hand on my arm, squeezing it lightly. "Man, that's intense," he muttered. But his hand stayed there for longer than necessary. The situation got even more confusing when we started cooking together on weekends. Blake suggested we make more elaborate dishes, since we have free time. While making dinner, our hands would accidentally touch when we reached for utensils at the same time. He would always ask me to grab spices from the higher shelves, even though he was almost the same height as me. "You have longer arms," he'd say, laughing, as I stretched my arm over him to get what he wanted. After my toughest shifts at the refinery, Blake started insisting on massaging my shoulders. "It's the least I can do since you're always making coffee for both of us," he'd say. The massages started simple, almost professional, but they gradually became slower, more deliberate. His fingers would trace my shoulders and neck with a softness that made me close my eyes. During these sessions, we talked about things we had never shared before. Blake told me about the pressure from his family to settle down and find a serious girlfriend. He talked about how he hated having to fake interest in relationships that didn't make sense to him. "You know how it is, right? Everyone expects you to follow a specific script: college, job, marriage, kids. But what if the script doesn't make sense for you?" he said one of those nights, his hands working a knot of tension in my left shoulder. "I totally get that," I replied. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living the life others expect, not the one I really want." It was conversations like that that really brought us closer. I found out that Blake values authenticity above everything else. He could tell that I was holding back important parts of myself, but he never pressured me to open up faster than I was comfortable with. Blake is more spontaneous than me, more willing to break social rules when they don't make sense to him. I've always been more cautious, analyzing every situation before acting. But we had a lot in common too. We both loved old action movies, and we'd spend hours debating the best directors of the 80s and 90s. On weekends, we'd create complicated dishes just for the fun of cooking something special. He introduced me to the world of wine, while I taught him to appreciate local craft beers. Blake liked electronic music for work, but I discovered he also enjoyed classic rock when he was relaxing. I preferred podcasts about history and science, but I started to like the playlists he created for our dinners. For a few weeks, this new dynamic worked well. I managed to convince myself that we were just two friends getting to know each other better. But there were times when I'd catch Blake watching me with an intensity that made me nervous, or when our eyes would meet for a few seconds longer than normal, and neither of us would look away. The situation started getting more complicated when Zach, a mutual friend who came over to play video games, started making weird comments. "You two look like a pair of newlyweds," he said on a Friday night, while Blake was making popcorn for our gaming session. "Have you seen how you complete each other? Dylan gets stuff from the high shelves, Blake gives massages at the end of the day. It's almost like you're made for each other." Blake laughed, but I noticed he didn't deny the comment. "We just get along, simple as that," he replied, giving me a look I couldn't decipher. "You get along a little too well, if you ask me," Zach continued. "When was the last time either of you went out with someone? You're too comfortable in this domestic routine." That observation bothered me more than I expected. It was true I hadn't gone out with anyone since moving to Austin. At first, I used work as an excuse. I was adjusting to a new routine, getting to know the city, establishing my career. But the truth was, I didn't feel like meeting other people. I was genuinely happy spending my free time at home with Blake, and that scared me. I've been at the refinery for almost a year, and my coworkers always make jokes about relationships, sex, and pretty women they see on the street. I always participated in these conversations superficially, agreeing when necessary, laughing at the right jokes. But lately, I would catch myself thinking about other things during these conversations. I'd think about Blake laughing at something funny he saw online. I'd think about him focused on his laptop, his forehead creased as he solved a programming problem. I'd think about the massages he gave me, the feeling of his fingers working the tension out of my muscles. I started to worry about what my coworkers would think if they knew about these changes in my personal life. I was still establishing my reputation at the company, building important professional relationships. What if someone found out I was, what exactly? Confused about my feelings for my best friend? The worry grew when my supervisor commented during lunch, "Carter, you seem more cheerful lately. Must be a special girl, huh? When do we get to meet her?" "It's nothing like that," I answered too quickly. "I'm just enjoying living in Austin." But the question kept nagging at me. Was I really more cheerful, happier? And if I was, what did that mean? That night, Blake noticed I was quieter than normal. We were watching a movie on the couch, but I was barely paying attention to the screen. My mind was busy trying to sort out all these confusing thoughts. "You okay?" Blake asked, pausing the movie. "You seem distant today." "Just thinking about work," I lied. Blake studied me for a few seconds, then moved closer on the couch. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? We're friends." The word friends echoed in my mind in a strange way. Was that what we were? Just friends? Because the way I felt when I was near him didn't feel like just friendship. The way my heart sped up when he smiled at me. How I'd catch myself watching his movements around the house. How I eagerly looked forward to the moments we spent together. I know, I managed to reply. It's just, life changes. You know how it is. Blake put his hand on my shoulder, his thumb making small circles through my shirt. Changes can be good. Sometimes they lead us to places we didn't even know we wanted to go. There was something in his tone, in the way he looked at me, that suggested we were talking about a lot more than work or adjusting to the city. But I wasn't brave enough to explore that unknown territory. Not yet. The tension that had been building between us for weeks finally reached a breaking point on a Thursday night. I'd had a particularly tough day at the refinery. One of the welders had gotten hurt, and I had to cover his shift on top of my own. I got home with sore shoulders and an exhausted mind. But when I opened the apartment door, the smell that greeted me made me completely forget my fatigue. It was the unmistakable aroma of homemade lasagna, the kind Blake had made only once before, and that I couldn't stop praising. My favorite dish. "Blake?" I called, dropping my bag by the door. "In the kitchen," he answered. I found him in an apron, stirring a sauce on the stove. The kitchen was lit only by the under-cabinet lights, creating a much more intimate atmosphere than our usual one. There was an open bottle of red wine on the counter, 2 glasses already poured. "Man, you didn't have to do this," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Blake turned to me, a soft smile on his lips. "I wanted to do something special. You've seemed stressed the last few days." He was right. Ever since Zach's comments and the questions at work, I'd been more tense, more defensive. Blake had noticed, of course. He always noticed those things. "How was your day?" he asked, offering me one of the glasses of wine. "Complicated. Jenkins got hurt, and I had to do his job too." "I'm wiped out," I replied, accepting the wine. The first sip was like a warm hug from the inside. "You do seem tense," Blake observed, moving closer to me as I leaned on the kitchen counter. "Let me take a look at those shoulders." Before I could protest, his hands were already on my shoulders, over my work shirt. The massage started like always, professional, focused on the knots of tension he knew well. But there was something different this time. His movements were slower, more deliberate. "Relax," he murmured near my ear. "You're stiff as a board." Gradually, the pressure of his fingers intensified, working the tense muscles of my neck and shoulders. I closed my eyes, letting the wine and his touch dissolve the stress of the day. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body behind me, his warm breath grazing the back of my neck. "Blake," I murmured, starting to turn slowly. Our eyes met, and this time neither of us looked away. The distance between our faces was minimal. I could see small golden flecks in his brown eyes, feel his breath mixing with mine. "Dylan." He said my name as if it were a question and an answer at the same time. The unsaid question hung in the air between us. My heart was beating so fast I was sure he could hear it. All those weeks of tension, of long looks, of touches that lasted a few seconds too long, had led us to this moment. "What if I want this to happen?" I whispered, my voice hoarse with nervousness and a desire I was finally admitting to myself. Blake smiled, that same provocative smile I'd seen on the morning it all began. But now there was something more. Tenderness, relief, maybe even a little triumph. "Then close the door," he replied, nodding toward the kitchen door that led to the living room. Without breaking eye contact, I reached out and pushed the door until it closed with a soft click. The sound echoed in the semi-lit kitchen, like a period at the end of a sentence we'd been writing for months. Blake moved even closer, his hands coming up to frame my face. "Are you sure?" he asked, his thumbs tracing soft circles on my cheeks. In response, I tilted my head, and our lips finally met. The kiss started hesitantly, exploring unknown territory. His lips were soft, with a residual taste of red wine that made me want more. Gradually, the hesitation gave way to urgency. My hands found his waist, pulling him closer, while he intertwined his fingers in my hair. It was like a dam had broken. All those weeks of pent-up tension finally found a release. We moved against each other with a need that surprised me with its intensity. Blake gently pushed me against the kitchen counter, his body pressed against mine. "I've waited so long for this," he murmured against my lips. "You knew?" I asked, trying to process this revelation. "All this time you knew?" "I knew I felt it," he answered, his hands exploring my arms, my shoulders. "But I wasn't sure about you. Not until that morning in the bathroom, the way you looked at me. I knew there was something there. His words made me blush. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. Neither could I, he confessed, smiling against my lips before kissing me again. What followed was a careful but passionate exploration. Blake's hands traced the contours of my arms, the result of years of physical work at the refinery. He would murmur his approval against my skin, his lips leaving a trail of kisses down my neck. I discovered his chest was more muscular than it looked under the loose t-shirts he always wore at home. My fingers explored every contour, every reaction I could provoke from him. It was like learning a new language, one where every touch communicated what words couldn't express. We moved like two rivers meeting the sea, initially hesitant about the new course, then naturally flowing toward each other. The kitchen counter became our altar, where vulnerabilities were offered and accepted without judgment. Blake guided my hands, showing me where he liked to be touched, how to apply the right pressure. Every low sigh that escaped his lips encouraged me to keep exploring. His own fingers mapped my body with a precision that suggested he had imagined this moment many times before. "You're amazing," he whispered in my ear, his warm breath sending shivers down my spine. I lost track of time. We existed only in that intimate bubble we created in the semi-darkness of the kitchen. The outside world disappeared. There was no work tomorrow, no worries about what others would think, no fear of the unknown. There was just the two of us, finally honest about what we felt. The oven timer went off at some distant point, but we were too lost in our own discovery to pay attention. The lasagna could wait. This moment couldn't. Blake kissed me with an intensity that left me dizzy, his hands firm on my waist. I responded with the same urgency, discovering I could make him let out a soft moan when I lightly bit his bottom lip. It was as if we had found a dance we had always known how to perform, but never had the chance to try. When we finally separated, we were both breathing heavily. Blake rested his forehead on mine, his eyes still closed, a satisfied smile on his slightly swollen lips. "Dinner's burning," he said, but made no move to pull away. "I don't care," I replied, honestly. The lasagna could turn to charcoal. I didn't want this moment to end. Eventually, reality brought us back. The smell of burning finally became impossible to ignore. Blake turned off the oven with a resigned sigh, pulling out the lasagna that had very dark edges. "I'm sorry," he said, looking genuinely upset that he had ruined the special dinner. "It's perfect," I lied, pulling him back close to me. "It was the best dinner of my life." He laughed, that sound I had learned to love during our months of living together. But now it had a completely different meaning. We stayed there, intertwined in the kitchen, our breathing gradually returning to normal. There was a comfortable silence between us, full of things left unsaid but understood. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, slowly synchronizing with mine. "This changes everything," I murmured against his hair. "Only if you want it to," Blake replied, his fingers playing with the collar of my work shirt. But we both knew it had already changed. There was no going back after this. There was no way to pretend we were just roommates, just friends. We had crossed a line I didn't even know existed, and on the other side was a completely new territory to explore. "I do," I finally admitted. "I want it to change." Blake pulled away just enough to look me in the eyes. "Are you sure? Because once we really start this, I won't be able to go back to pretending you're just my friend." The vulnerability in his voice touched me deeply. I realized he was also scared, also risking something by admitting what he felt. "I can't pretend anymore either," I replied. "Not after this." He smiled, that expression of relief and happiness that I wanted to see every day for the rest of my life. In the days that followed, a new dynamic was established between us. There were looks full of meaning during our morning coffee, touches that intentionally lasted longer, conversations full of subtext that only the two of us understood. We still hadn't labeled what we were to each other, but there was a tacit understanding that something fundamental had changed. Blake started sleeping in my room some nights, just holding each other, exploring this new emotional intimacy. I discovered he talked in his sleep, mumbling things about work projects mixed with my name. I also discovered that waking up with him by my side made every morning feel like a promise of something good. But along with the happiness came the worries. How would we explain this to our friends, our families? What would happen at work if someone found out? How would we navigate this unknown territory without ruining what we had built? These questions hung over us like clouds before a storm. But for now, we were willing to live in the eye of the hurricane, in that calm space where there was only us, and the certainty that, at least for now, we were exactly where we wanted to be. The decisive moment came completely unexpectedly on a Saturday morning. Blake and I were relaxing on the couch, my legs stretched out on his lap while we watched an old action movie. It was a domestic scene that had become natural for us in recent weeks. This physical closeness that no longer needed to be disguised or justified. I was feeling more relaxed than I had in years. The last few days had been an emotional roller coaster, but also incredibly freeing. I no longer had to analyze every gesture, every look. I could simply be myself with Blake, without filters or masks. That's when his phone rang. Blake looked at the screen and sighed. "It's Trevor, my brother. Can I get it?" "Sure," I replied, making to move my legs from his lap, but he held my leg, indicating I could stay. Trevor was 2 years older than Blake, and from what I knew from our conversations, was the typical protective older brother. Married, 2 kids, a house in the suburbs of Houston. He represented everything the Morrison family expected Blake to eventually become as well. "Hey, bro," Blake answered, putting it on speaker without asking me. It was another sign of how our relationship had evolved. I was no longer just the roommate who had to leave the room during family calls. "Blake, how are things over there? It's been a while since we've really talked." Trevor's voice filled the living room. "Everything's good. Working a lot. You know how it is. What about your social life? Met anyone interesting? Mom keeps asking if you're bringing anyone home for Christmas this year." I felt Blake tense up next to me. This was always a delicate question for him. During all the months we lived together, I had witnessed several family calls where he would deflect questions about relationships, making excuses about being focused on his career. But this time was different. Blake looked me directly in the eyes, as if he were asking for my permission for something. There was determination in that look, but also a little fear. I nodded slightly, not knowing exactly what I was agreeing to, but trusting him completely. "Actually, Trev," Blake began, his voice getting firmer, "I am seeing someone special." The silence on the other end of the line lasted for a few eternal seconds. My heart was racing. Blake was really doing this, publicly coming out about us, to his family. "Really? Man, that's great news. What's she like? When do we get to meet her?" Blake took a deep breath, his fingers playing absently with my leg. "It's not she, Trevor. It's he. And you already know him in a way. It's Dylan, my roommate." The silence that followed was even longer. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. Blake kept his eyes fixed on me, as if I were his anchor in that moment of extreme vulnerability. "Dylan, the guy you share an apartment with?" Trevor finally asked, his voice filled with confusion. "Yeah. It just happened naturally, over the months. It wasn't planned, it just happened. And I'm happy, Trev. Happier than I've been in a long time." I could see tears forming in Blake's eyes as he spoke. The courage he was showing moved me completely. He was risking his relationship with his family, facing potential judgment, all so he wouldn't have to hide what he felt for me. "Blake, whoa. That's a lot to process all at once," Trevor said. "But if you're happy, man, if you're really happy, then I'm happy for you." The relief on Blake's face was instant. "Seriously?" "Of course, bro. You're my brother no matter what. You're gonna have to give me some time to get used to the idea, okay? And maybe prep Mom and Dad before you make the big announcement." Blake laughed, wiping his eyes. "Thanks, Trev. It means a lot to me." "Is Dylan there? Can I talk to him?" Blake looked at me questioningly. I nodded, even though I felt immensely nervous. "Hi, Trevor," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dylan. Man, what a situation, huh? I never would have thought when you guys first started living together that it would turn into this." "To be honest, me neither," I admitted. "But it did, and, well, your brother is an incredible guy." "He is, and apparently so are you, if you manage to win over that stubborn guy. Take good care of each other, okay?" After Blake hung up the phone, we stayed silent for a few minutes. The weight of what had just happened hung between us. Blake had officially come out about our relationship to his family. There was no turning back. "You really did that," I said, still processing. Blake turned to me completely on the couch, taking my hands. "I got tired of hiding. I got tired of pretending you're just my roommate when you mean so much more than that to me. What if your family doesn't accept it? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not going to hide something that makes me happy just because other people might not understand." There was a simple wisdom in those words that cut through all my rationalized fears. For weeks I had been worrying about the opinions of people who didn't even know the real person behind the professional I showed at work. "You're right," I murmured. "I'm tired of living in fear of what other people will think." Blake smiled, that smile that had won me over from the first day. "So, it's you and me against the world?" "It's you and me against the world," I agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. In the months that followed, this decision to be honest about our relationship brought significant changes to our lives. Some challenges were smaller than I expected. Others were bigger. At work, when I finally casually mentioned that I was seeing someone during a lunch conversation, the reaction was surprisingly positive. My colleagues noticed I was more relaxed, more confident, and that was reflected in the quality of my work. When I eventually made it clear that this someone was Blake, there were a few raised eyebrows, but nothing that affected my professional performance or my work relationships. Blake's family took longer to process the news, but Trevor kept his promise of support. He helped prepare their parents, and although their acceptance was gradual, they eventually understood that their son's happiness was more important than their preconceived expectations. Blake and I moved to a bigger apartment after a few months, a place we chose together, decorated together, that truly became ours. We no longer had to navigate the awkwardness of roommates who had become something more. We were simply a couple building a life together. I learned that Blake snores lightly when he's really tired, but that the sound has become comforting to me. He discovered that I have a habit of organizing spices in alphabetical order, something he found charming rather than obsessive. Little quirks and peculiarities that become endearing when you love someone. Our mornings now started with intentionally shared coffee, not by chance. Blake still worked late, but he always made a point of having dinner with me when I got home from the refinery. We created rituals: Friday night movies, cooking together on Saturdays, park walks on Sundays. 6 months after that phone call that changed everything, I found myself on a Tuesday morning making coffee and smiling as I heard Blake humming in the shower. It was funny how life could come full circle. A year ago, I was in a different city, living a life that seemed right on paper, but that didn't truly fulfill me. Now, in this apartment we called our own, with the familiar sound of the morning routine of the man I loved, I realized I had found something I didn't even know I was looking for: authenticity, genuine connection, the courage to be completely myself with another person. Blake appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for work, his hair still damp from the shower. "Morning, babe," he said, kissing me before pouring himself some coffee. "Morning," I replied, still smiling. Simple words we had exchanged hundreds of times, but that never lost their special meaning for me. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing my smile. "About how a normal Tuesday morning can be the beginning of everything," I answered. Blake laughed. That sound I knew I wanted to hear every day for the rest of my life. Every Tuesday is special when you have the right person to share it with. And he was right. We had learned that love doesn't just happen in big cinematic gestures or moments of high drama. It also happens on Tuesday mornings, over shared coffee, in the simple act of choosing, every day, to be honest and vulnerable with another person. So, were you surprised by this twist? Sometimes the best discoveries about ourselves come when we least expect them, don't they? When we finally have the courage to be vulnerable with someone who truly cares about us. If you liked this story of self-acceptance and courage, don't forget to hit that sweet like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our next adventures. In the comments, tell me, have you ever had a moment that completely changed your perception of yourself? Or maybe a friendship that turned into something deeper? I'm genuinely curious to hear your stories. And if you want more content like this, real stories about authentic human connections and personal discoveries, let me know below what kind of story you'd like to hear in the next video. Maybe something about second chances, about unexpected meetings, or about how to overcome fears to live the life we really want. Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button to get access to more stories like this. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered, and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right now. See you in the next video, everyone, and remember, sometimes the greatest courage we can have is simply being honest about who we are and what we feel. Bye.